I'm Perry Bacon, and this is the New Republic show right now. I'm joined by two of my favorite political commentators, Will Stancil. You can read him on Substack. You can also see a lot of his great posts on Twitter and Blue Sky, a very insightful voice on politics. Brian Beutler used to work for the New Republic at some point, also Cricket Media for a period. He now has a great Substack called Off Message, one of the most insightful writers about liberal and democratic politics. Welcome, guys.
It's good to be here, man.
Absolutely.
So I want to start with, I think the question I want to sort of zone in on is this, which is that essentially that affordability there's a big discourse about affordability right now. Essentially, that the argument essentially is that affordability is the way to think about American politics today. It's the defining issue, and if the Democrats figure out how to win on that issue, they will win. And so I want to talk about that assumption, because I think the three of us are not sure that's quite correct, but I want to sort of unpack that a little bit. I'll start with Will. Is affordability the defining issue of politics, and if Democrats win that, they'll be in great shape?
Well, it's certainly an issue people are talking about a lot, but I don't really know how you win it. And it sounds a lot like a lot of issues I've heard about in the past that people said the same thing about. The Democrats unequivocally won and then still lost the election. So I'm pretty skeptical myself.
And when you say other issues, you mean like healthcare? You mean the economy? What do you mean by that?
So every single cycle, you get the same thing. You see Democrats say, "Well, we would have won last time if we had just focused on the working class kitchen table economic issues that real Americans care about." And so what they actually call that issue always changes. So some years it's healthcare, some years it's jobs, some years it's affordability, or inflation, which is literally just affordability by a different term. And they always the issue itself kind of rotates, but they all have these similar qualities. It's every single cycle this gets brought up, and I just haven't really, you don't notice a lot of difference in the election outcomes when Democrats focus on these things. I mean, it doesn't. I just don't really see what the evidence is that this is moving a lot of votes.
Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Will said. I think that there's maybe a couple distinctions between Democrats focusing on affordability as a concept and focusing on other kitchen table issues where there are, in theory at least, policy solutions that they could bring to voters and say, look, you have concerns about healthcare, you have concerns about prescription drug costs, vote for us, we'll lower your healthcare costs, we'll lower your prescription drug costs in these fairly straightforward ways. With affordability, because it's a subjective term, it's not measuring anything real, the risk is that they win while campaigning on this issue and then have nothing really material to offer voters to actually address what voters say their concern is. So, I mean, what I see happening is, like in 2018, Democrats are very likely to win because of backlash to Donald Trump. Democrats will reverse engineer a different story where they won because of their brilliant political commitment to lowering the cost of living, and thus tell themselves that to maintain power, to not waste all their new political capital, they have to do stuff to lower prices when they don't really have any good ideas for how to do that. So it's in some sense even like a worse trap to be in if they've convinced themselves that this is really like political gold.
Let me make sure I follow it. You basically said affordability is not a concrete thing, but I think in theory, like how much can I afford my house? Can I afford my groceries? Is obviously real. So break down what you mean a little bit.
Yeah. So I mean, look, like I think that there's maybe three ways that you can look at the poll finding, or the consistent poll finding that voters are saying right now when asked, what's the biggest issue for you? They say it's the cost of stuff, right? My life is unaffordable. One interpretation of that is that it's literally true and they want to see the numbers go down.
Okay.
Another, on the completely opposite end of the spectrum, is that they have sort of free-floating antipathy to Donald Trump over the economy, but maybe a variety of issues. And so they park their sentiment negatively wherever they're asked about it, including about, Trump's promises to bring prices down or to reduce inflation. It's not that they really feel uniquely stressed at the moment. They just know that Trump hasn't helped and he promised he would, and they're pissed. And so that's what they say. And then I think that there's like a middle ground, and I think this is probably where I'd put my money on the true opinion of the public to the extent that something like that exists, which is that voters are unhappy with Donald Trump for a lot of reasons, but they wouldn't be pinpointing prices per se if their real malaise wasn't in some sense economic in nature. And if that's the case, then if you're Democrats, you really want to try to not be too literal about everything, right? Like if you say, well, people are saying affordability, they're saying the cost of living, therefore we need to come up with an agenda that will make meat prices fall and fast food prices fall, and just across the board the numbers will drop. And what you need to do is say, if people are just kind of unhappy with the state of things or how secure things feel, what are they really asking for, right? Like, and I, as like a man of a certain age, I've lived through 9/11, the Great Recession, the COVID pandemic. And sometimes I feel like I don't want to go through another one or two of these things before I reach retirement age. And I'm not sure I could weather it financially if that kind of thing happened. Well, what does that mean about me? I think what it means about me is that I would feel better about things if America had better safety nets. And so if you want to talk to Americans in a way that sort of scratches their affordability itch, you might do it by saying we need to make life fairer for people. We need to make it so that if there are emergencies in the world, everything doesn't fall apart. But that's not really how Democrats are interpreting these repeat findings about affordability. They're saying we can't attack Donald Trump on other issues because we have to remain laser focused on affordability. And they're actually trying to make prices go down, like literally down. And if they try to do that in power, I think that they're likely to fail. But what's happening right now in politics while they're trying to win votes is that they're trying to make Donald Trump's health insurance premiums fall so that Donald Trump can take credit for lowering prices. And they are running on an affordability message with weeks before the Supreme Court probably brings its tariffs down, which will eventually bring prices down too. And so they're setting up politics in a way that will allow Donald Trump to say, everyone agreed affordability was the issue and I solved it. So I just think that if they're going down this road, if they are going to commit themselves to devoting X percent of their messaging energy to affordability, they need to be clear in their heads about what all this stuff means, or they're going to either fumble the ball before the midterms or else run into the end zone and be like, now we don't know what to do with the power that we've won because we made promises we can't keep.
Well,
This is unusual, Brian, because I think we substantially disagree on this. I mean, first off, I'm going to say that the trap that you have described, that Democrats will say, we will make things affordable, and they get in office and they cannot do so.
Right.
Precisely the trap that Donald Trump has fallen into. He ran on, I'm going to lower prices, and there was no idea really what that meant. It was this kind of foggy notion. And then it became impossible for him to say, that he's done so. And the irony here is, I would say, and this is, you were getting a lot of likes, and I won't get any likes for saying this, but the irony here is that prices are not actually up that much over the last year. I mean, we measure this. This is inflation. This is what inflation measures, and it's up 3%. So that's higher than usual, but it's still a lot lower than it was in 2022 and 2023. And so prices up 3%. But the problem is, because this notion is so vague and so foggy, that anyone who is mad about any price anywhere in their life, anything that just seems unfair, they don't want to pay it. Oh, I hate having to pay for college for my kids. I hate having to pay my mortgage. I hate having, rent sucks. I mean, I'm a renter. Rent does suck. They can just say, well, that's the affordability crisis right there. It's a free floating, like inchoate discontent that you can't get rid of because there's no way to just really describe, first of all, what it is, and second of all, how you solved it. And Donald Trump walked directly into that trap. So I don't have a lot of sympathy for him when he's out there saying, well, inflation is not that bad. Like, why is everyone so mad? Because he exploited it. But also, he's not totally wrong. It was the same thing that Biden was saying a year ago, where he's saying inflation is down. Why are you so mad? He's not wrong. It isn't that bad. Compared to using the measures that we typically use.
Right.
With that said, I think that what you're saying is that Democrats should avoid that by running on this platform of we'll improve the safety net. Great, I love improving the safety net. The moment you say safety net, you get likes on the platform. Everyone loves talking about the safety net. We're all liberals. I love improving the safety net. Let's do it. I will say that the platform of let's improve the safety net. Let's help the people the least fortunate. Let's make sure that that reduce precarity in American life. That's just what Democrats have been running on for my entire life. I mean, that is literally just like the standard Democratic platform. And so while I think it's great, and I'm all for it and I'm a Democrat, if this was our electoral goal, I think we would be, we wouldn't be in this bind. We'd be winning every election 80-20. I mean, because
we're not disagreeing. When I say
that's what I thought too, right?
Yeah, when I say if Democrats want to make a pitch to voters related to affordability, they should make it in terms that they can deliver on. I'm not saying that necessarily represents some sort of optimal politics. I'm saying that the mistake would be this is $9.99 a pound. We're going to make it $8.99 a pound with policy hocus pocus, and then they win because they're capturing the bad vibes of the people and turning them into election victories, and then they can't actually bring the prices down.
And I think
as you were saying, the Donald Trump just lied about this. He saw survey results. People are upset about prices. I'll bring prices down day one. It was a lie. And now he's, sort of reaping what he sowed. And so I don't have any sympathy for him. I think it's totally fine. Turnabout being fair play here for Democrats to be like, look, he said he'd fix this on day one. He was lying. It's like the latest in 1,000 lies he's told you. And we can't let him keep getting one over on us in this way.
And it's certainly true. I mean, it's worth noting that while inflation is 3%, we're not seeing runaway 50. People saying, prices up 50%. The economy is getting worse. There's not a lot of hiring right now. It seems like we may be headed for a recession, which would be really bad. And the tariffs are increasing prices. I mean, inflation probably be down to 1%, except for these insane tariffs he's implemented. So it's not like he's doing a good job. It's just that the idea that we're seeing this runaway affordability crisis it's considerably better than it was 3 years ago even.
Brian, go ahead, and then I'm going to, sorry. Go ahead, Brian, quickly, and then I'm going to jump to a little bit.
The safety net enhancement as a solution to malaise is sort of I think, a long run thought. It's sort of what Democrats should do because it's the right thing to do, less than this is how you square the circle of voters say, focus on affordability. So you give them a safety net gift basket and then they reward you for that, right? I think that the campaign against Donald Trump should be straight up confrontation with all the ways he's failed, all the ways he's lies, all the ways he's corrupt. And you see in Democratic communications that they are instead going to rerun the play they ran ahead of 2018, where every year, every few months or something like that, Al Green, the congressman from Texas, introduces an impeachment resolution against Donald Trump. Those resolutions are their privilege, so they automatically get a vote on the House floor. And because Democrats are scared of their own shadow, every time he does this, they have to figure out what they want to say or do about it. And the official leadership position is Democrats should vote present, not for or against. Basically, take themselves out of the equation. Don't pick a fight. Let Republicans vote it down. You keep your powder dry for whatever might happen next year. Say, look, this is going nowhere because Republicans don't want to impeach him. Meanwhile, we're laser focused on affordability, right? I think that's wrong. That's a evidence that they are treating affordability as a kind of panacea that makes them have to frees them from the need to be confrontational or to think for themselves or to actually kind of understand what is driving public opinion and how to either surf it or change it. It's just plug and play like it was 6 years ago or 4 years ago, whenever that was, 6 years ago, 8 years ago. And
time is
that is super disappointing. But I throw out this distinction between should we credit public opinion with being sour in ways that must, in some sense, be tied to economics? Because otherwise, it's a little weird that all the voters are alighting on this one critique about cost of living and prices. Probably there is something something ambient, that is making voters feel economically insecure. And what are the things you can do to try to alleviate that? And I think that the answer to that question lies in safety nets more than in price controls or engineering a recession so that you get deflation or anything like that.
Let me shift back a few years now because we've referred to 2010 a few times now. I think it's worth unpacking that there's a theory of democratic politics that kind of evolves from Bill Clinton wins the election. James Carville says it's the economy, stupid. And if you listen carefully, both the sort of left wing of the Democratic Party, Bernie Sanders, and so on, those people think the elections are about the economy. Democrats need to win the working class back, and that's kind of where they go. The center left, let's talk about Joe Biden, also thinks the elections are about the economy. They think if you have infrastructure bills and so on, that will make sure Democrats win. I think you all are skeptical of both the center left and the left position that the economy drives politics. So let's go through some examples of this. So Brian, your position basically is in 2018, Democrats won the election because of backlash to Donald Trump, not backlash because of healthcare specifically, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I can like put some meat on that bones, which is that they defeated Donald Trump's effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act in April or May of 2017. And then a whole bunch of stuff happened that did not include the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act was intact. And then 18 months later, they won an election and they said it had everything to do with healthcare. And so like the timelines don't even really add up. But they told themselves, we beat him on healthcare, and then we talked about healthcare a lot, and then we won the election. Ergo, healthcare must explain everything. And I think that's
I'm not a guy who knows all the logical fallacies by heart, but you can see that what they're doing here, which is that they are starting with the conclusion that the economy must explain political outcomes, that voters are always and forever primarily voting on the economy. And I think that, like you said, people across the political spectrum on the left believe this for various reasons. People on the very far left, and people who are on the sort of socialist left, believe it because their ideology is sort of premised on the idea that, everyone.
You're saying Marxism is based on this kind of working class, proletariat. Yeah, right.
People in the center left believe it often because it's a lot more convenient than acknowledging that social issues are real. They don't want to talk about race. They don't want to talk about gender. They don't want to talk about controversial cultural stuff. So they say, it really, the economy, that's a nice, policy sounding thing we can talk about that sounds moderate. And so it's, they feel much more comfortable talking about the world in those terms. And so they start with the premise that everyone is essentially making political choices based on the economy. Then they observe what's happening in politics. And then they go looking for the economic argument or the policy argument that's sort of, kitchen table economic related that explained it. And it's so funny because it's so funny that Democrats have always managed to find their good kitchen table economic arguments in Donald Trump midterms, and then to a lesser extent in Donald Trump general elections. And, but when they are incumbent, somehow they lose their ability to talk about kitchen table economic, issues. And it's like, I don't know. Do you think that maybe that that it's actually just these cultural incumbent backlashes that we're seeing, and that we're seeing, these larger cultural debates, and you are pinning a narrative on top of them to fit with your assumption about how the world works?
Let's move the timeline a little bit, though. 2021, 2022, Joe Biden becomes very unpopular. Is this the one place where we would concede that this is an economic story about inflation?
No.
No, go ahead, Will.
All
right,
why, Harry. I know you know the answer to this, because when did Joe Biden become unpopular?
Joe Biden became unpopular. He lost 8 points in August 2021, which was not actually a high time for inflation, but was
collapsed in August 2021, no. Or what happened in August 2021?
The U.S. withdrew from Afghanistan, and the media covered it, the bad withdrawal, like it was the end of time. So that's what actually happened. If you look at the Joe Biden's approval rating, this is tracks really carefully. But Brian, that's what I think. But Brian, I don't want to dismiss the idea that high inflation was part of what was happening. I agree that I've written the Afghanistan timeline makes more sense, but I don't want to dismiss the inflation help hurting Biden.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's two ways to look at this question. One is to ask yourself, like, why party leaders become unpopular when they're in power.
Yes, right.
And trying to like always match the changes in their approval rating with some economic shock. And doing that usually yields nothing, right? Like there's a lot of noise, very little signal, but we want there to be a high signal to noise ratio so that we can control politics, right? So we can like fully grasp what's happening and try to shape outcomes in the future. then there's this other question of like, what all was in the mix that made public opinion detach from measured economic circumstances, right? Like for decades before 2022, people's views about the economy synced up really well with public like macro indicators that the government measures very precisely, right? And then that relationship stopped, at least in the United States, right? I don't know. I'd be curious to know if the same thing happened in like Finland, where they have stronger safety
You don't
nets.
have good economic data is part of the problem. US,
Right.
yeah.
So my hunch is that this extended period of malaise where you have a good economy throughout basically the whole Biden presidency, but everyone's miserable. They believe that there's a recession when there's not. They believe that every part of the country outside of their community is suffering mightily because they're picking it up from various sources of vibes or whatever. Why did that happen, and to what extent is there an actual economic component to that thing happening? And I would buy that having 12 months or 18 months of inflation maybe contributed to it. I definitely do buy that algorithmic information consumption has a lot to do with it. And then I could buy that the pandemic just like was a sort of straw breaking the camel's back moment of reshaping public expectations of what the government is supposed to do. I feel like we've been living in this era of this divergence between sentiment and reality for long enough to assume that there's got to be something in the economic lives of people that's missing, that's contributing to this new phenomenon, which is why I feel like it's not necessarily a fool's errand for Democrats to look for ways to, in the long run, address it and try to bring those two things back into alignment. But I don't think that is like excellent. Like, there's not an on-off switch, and it's not something that they can fix like within the first month of coming back into power in 2029. And so, like, basically what I would like to see is Democrats acting less like they think that they found a silver bullet to win elections, and more like they have put their finger on a problem and they're really reasoning through how to solve it, while also just doing partisan fighting to win the proximate election. Like, just do those three things at the same time, and you'll have more confidence from me that you know what you're doing than with this. Aha, we figured it out. It's affordability, and like we're just going to run on that and all our eggs in that basket, and like that's what you can expect from us. I mean, I'd be curious to hear Will's take if your view is that really this is all hallucinated and like there's nothing about the economy that's really driving this. It's all, recursive people hearing affordability, repeating affordability, and material conditions play no part in it. I've moved away from that view a little bit.
I think that maybe there's something we're missing in the economy that's driving this disconnect. We've looked pretty hard.
Yeah,
to be honest.
I don't think that these rent changes to the third degree or whatever, third derivative of
in terms of something that we haven't factored in right. It could be interest rates, maybe.
Give me what?
Interest rates.
Yeah. Right.
But let me just say something just like purely subjective from my point of view. But if I wasn't a writer, if I didn't like make arguments with the hope of persuading people for a living, and I was just a guy who had the same ideological views that I hold, working at a coffee shop or at an accounting firm or whatever, I would have felt less economically secure on November 6th or whatever, or 8th of last year, immediately, because I lived through the first Trump presidency. I know that him being in office is an existential danger to public health, to the economy, to global peace and stability. And so if you asked me for my economic sentiment the day after he won the election, I would have put it lower than the day before, right?
The problem with that,
and part of it is about Trump, but part of it is also like I felt exhausted coming out of the pandemic, and I actually felt like, man, my adult life has been bookended by cataclysms.
Yeah,
and it's only by luck and grit and circumstance that I have made it through that okay financially. But things could have turned out way differently for me. And I don't know what will happen if this happens again. I do know that unless the society I live in takes me more seriously, provides me more of a safety net, um, then this looming uncertainty is just going to be with me until the next pandemic or whatever. And if that is like a reasonably sensible like view to hold after Trump gets reelected, well, you got to multiply that by some tens of millions of people, right? Like it's not going to
Brian, here's
be.
the thing.
Huh?
Like, we can look at how people felt about Trump's economy back in his first term, and most people didn't feel that way. At least for most of it, most people are pretty happy with the economy. I mean, that's the mystery here is that you have 2019. I mean, after the pandemic, things. I mean, there's generally a pretty sharp downturn. Although I will say that even after 2019, even after the COVID, economic sentiment stayed higher than you would maybe expect, and it really collapsed. Once Biden took office.
Yeah.
But there was generally a pretty positive impression of Trump's economy. So while certainly you feel that way, the best evidence we have is that most people don't actually, connect or didn't actually connect Trump to sort of economic precariousness, risk like that. Now, what's interesting, and I totally missed this prediction. I thought that a lot of this was a sort of cultural connection of Republicans to a strong economy, that Trump would take office and the vibe session, so to speak, would just evaporate. That
Mhm.
suddenly economic sentiment would go way up. And so I am admitting that I was completely wrong about that. That whatever is driving it is not just partisanship, because it has remained in place. In fact, maybe is stronger than ever as Trump has been in office, even though the economy has been substantially worse. People's reports of the economy. If you look at how people perceive the economy, it's right now, it's like worse than the 2008 recession. I mean, it is unbelievably poor.
No, but
Um,
do you feel like you would have whiffed on that? Because I
I,
basically whiffed on it too. But
I did
if
with
if if if, if,
yeah,
Trump, if Trump had come into office in January 2025 and done the sort of best case scenario thing I think we all hope for, which was just like declare victory, go golfing,
Don't do tariffs.
and,
Don't do tariffs. Right.
yeah, don't do
and just
tariffs. I still think it would have been bad. I mean, no, even before he did the tariffs, it was bad. It was immediately evident. I think you could see that the economic. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I remember thinking very early on, like, oh my god, it's still happening. People.
Do you mean when you say it, you mean negative economic sentiment,
Yeah,
not tied to economic
people
data?
seem very mad about the economy.
Let me jump in here and ask, how do you all explain the 2024 election? Because I think this history of like understanding how because I think the conventionalism is like prices were high, Joe Biden and Harris were blamed for prices. What do you think happened last November?
I think that there's a cultural malaise, and I'm not sure. I mean, I have my theories about where it's coming from. I think it has a lot to do with how we communicate in our information environment. But willing to hear different uh, uh, proposals as to what is causing it. But I think that essentially, one of the things that the way I see this is the way you conventionally talk about politics, people making political decisions, is that each of us observe the world around us. We look at the country, look at how we're doing economically. We're looking at in America, and we make a decision about what we think is happening and what we should do. And I think that is a terrible model for thinking about how people think of politics. The way people think, in my view, is that we talk to each other and we form opinions in consensus. And different groups may form these consensuses differently,
Mhm.
but it became apparent, for instance, in the 2023, 2024, that the thing you were supposed to believe about the economy, the consensus about the economy, is that it is bad and that no one can get by and no one can afford anything. And this consensus was remarkably widespread among kind of people of all ages, across geographic and cultural and age lines. And so it was sort of this independent, free floating, notion that existed in American society. And I think that this is a different sort of model of how voters think than we look around and just decide based on what we're observing in our lives. And I think that consensus has basically continued with Trump being president. And in fact, I think that's probably some of the stuff that Trump has dumped into society with the tariffs and the shredding the federal government has probably made it worse somewhat. But it still doesn't really explain the giant mismatch we're seeing. So I think that it's just our entire notion of conceiving how voters think about the world is just not quite right at the moment. We've been working with this like oversimplified approach where we're thinking of everyone as kind of a, totally independent individual, but people don't move individually. They move in concert. They influence each other. And because of that, you can get these large cultural, zeitgeist shifts essentially, one way or the other.
So you're saying vibes and with
Yeah,
a certain sense.
I mean, people like to say vibes, and it's like,
They like to make fun of it, but you're saying something more substantive.
there is something, there is, communication is there's people have been talking about this for centuries because there's something there that is difficult to describe. And whatever it is, it's not mysticism. There is some process here through which people's opinions are being formed and influenced that is, you see it, it's not just in politics, you can see it in fashion and in music and food and everything. There's these cultural shifts that happen over time. And I think it's worth, they influence how people decide who they're going to vote for, what they think politically. And I think it's worth kind of trying to delve in and explain what the mechanics are there.
Can I ask one question one theory that I think is related to you, and I'll be curious what you're going to. So it looks like the data I see is I think 47 of the 50 governors have a positive approval rating. So U.S. governors are popular. Pretty much every leader of every westernized country is unpopular. Britain, France. We can go through a list of those. We can define westernized however you like. I think from 2005 to 2025, the American president has been unpopular, minus maybe Obama's first couple years and Biden's first 6 months. So I think I'm agreeing with Will to some extent. Is the governor does not have the same media. If you want to compare the media environment and who and liken it, the average U.S. governor has 4 reporters covering them and not much scrutiny, and it's much more. And the U.S. president is much more like another world leader than a U.S. governor. Is there something about our informational environment in the West, let's say, that is making the leaders unpopular?
I think so. I think that there's something about the way we are communicating with each other about politics, something about how the way information spreads today that is creating, a kind of this topography of popularity where national leaders are unpopular, or everyone's always discontented. People are very discontented about the economy. Always, people want to say they can't afford anything, even though, again, I mean, I this is not going to be a popular thing to say.
I know you keep saying this, and people do not like it. Yes,
consumption of basically everything is higher than ever in the United States. So if you couldn't afford things today, people could afford way less 10 years ago. And yet people can't afford anything. And yet, and you see other elements of this, this information topography as well, where governors are popular. Mayors are generally unpopular. How, congressional members are popular with their constituents, but Congress is unpopular. Local, like, elected officials are unpopular. I mean, it's like, it's almost like this is the baseline, and it's coming from something that is not just, the economic trends of the immediate past.
Let's go, Brian. Just any reactions?
Yeah, I agree with what Will said. I think that social media has sort of accelerated this transition that we experienced, where a lot of people now want to have sort of a parasocial relationship with high-level political leaders, right? And that presidential elections in particular, but other big contests like who should control the House, have become something like a reality TV show contest between factions in the country, right? And so, like, Donald Trump is really good at that kind of positioning, and the Democratic Party is really not wired to win that fight regularly. They do it every 20 to 25 years when they come up with some handsome new
person.
Yeah, who like shows up and shakes things up, and they're going to have to try to find that person to run in 2028. So why did Kamala Harris lose? I mean, yes, like the vibes, the changing way like social information is transmitted, the way public opinion shifts. Like, I have a story about how I went from like Taylor Swift hater to Taylor Swift sort of agnostic because of this pull from social media and my friend group on a kind of music that I don't normally like. Like you can feel it happen to
There's so many
yourself.
people that love Creed now.
Right. It's weird, right? Like Creed had a revival, and it's like the same kind of phenomenon. And so, she was part of the administration that had like lost the confidence of the public. The Republicans hated Biden and her, and a lot of Democratic Party voters like lost faith in Biden for some for good reasons and some for bad reasons. Just like the vibe that he was this enfeebled loser, like ate way into his own support and the support. So that was something she had to overcome. And then she became the nominee like very abruptly in July. And she was ahead. And I think the story of the election was that she was actually ahead. And then her campaign blew it. And how did they blow it? I think that in some of it was like the way her campaign plus the big super PAC supporting her campaign chose to go about contesting the election was to like, you're winning, like don't take big risks, don't blow your lead, like, don't accidentally, don't get so comfortable mocking Trump and Vance that you say something offensive, or, we don't want to accidentally have another deplorables incident this year. Like very cautious. Don't be super generous with your time with, alternative media sources. Like there were a number of decisions that they made that if they hadn't made, I think the election could have gone the other way. But also like if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. had decided not to endorse anybody in the election, she might have won. Like it became a very contingent thing because it was a very close run election, just like 2016 in some ways. But I think that like because of that, the explanations, like you can explain it with much less than like the whole world has changed and we need to start from scratch when we think about how we run campaigns, and just say they had a 4-point lead and in 107 days they turned it into a 1.8% deficit.
Let me jump forward. I want to move on. Let me jump forward here. So 2025, did Zoran Mandani win because he was laser focused on affordability? Will?
No.
Go ahead.
I mean, I don't know how to say this other than like, look at the guy. Like, I don't live in New York City. I'm not a socialist particularly. But I would see his social media stuff. I'd see people talking about him, and it was hard not to get a little thrill of excitement from the guy. You're like, look how funny he is. He does these videos. He would do these things. He'd be so charming, and I think, you know, it's really hard for me to think about that the campaign he ran and think that what people were watching these videos and seeing him give these appearances, and the main takeaway they were getting from it was anything to do with his policy stance. It was just, I mean, I think his personality, his celebrity in a way, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but he is a person who has a natural celebrity and he's got Riz, I guess that's what I'd say if I was to and and I think that's it's sort of ineffable, but I really think that's probably the main.
Are you saying 0% on his policy platform, or like 10% or 40%? I'm trying to drill down a little bit because I think it's worth asking.
I think that this is just my view from run for office, I guess, but also like being a person who listens to politics. When you talk about policy stuff like that, people just kind of hear these broad terms. Oh, he's kind of talking about stuff that sounds okay. It's okay to me. It's not like they're going through and breaking it down and saying, "Oh, this is report." It's just like, "Oh yeah, he's kind of making the noise that sound okay." Now that I've established that he's saying the things that sound okay, sounds like he's kind of wants to help people like me. Do I trust the guy? Do I like the guy? Do I really think he wants to help people like me? And so, yeah, probably, if he'd gone in there and he'd been ranting and raving about, I don't know, some pick a far left thing, something that the most DSA member would want him to talk about.
Yes.
Then yeah, that'd probably drag him down some. But affordability is kind of a nice, safe place. It sounds good that everyone can kind of get behind. Oh, you're gonna make things kind of better for everybody. And then having established that, you have room to run on the fact that you are like the most charismatic candidate imaginable.
I see. Brian?
So I think what I'd say is that like getting a Democrat elected mayor of New York getting a progressive Democrat even elected mayor of New York is like a solved problem. And so there's almost nothing ever to learn from how a Democrat becomes mayor of New York.
Well, I think the question I'm asking is not was it upset, but did it did he win?
But so the reason that I'm kind of like reluctant to put it like affordability worked for him in XYZ ways is because I need to delve into the psychology of Cuomo voters, right? And I'll explain. Like the people who are highly invested in this question, like was Zoran Mamdani's victory extraordinary, and what won it for him?
Yeah.
Like the people with strong feelings of that are typically fighting a factional fight between each other.
Agreed.
Right. So progressives, leftists will say it's amazing. He got over 50% in a 3-person field. Like who else could have done such a thing? And then the people in the center or moderates want to say he ran as a Democrat, as a progressive Democrat for mayor of New York, and he only got 50% of the vote. So it seems like his leftist positions cost him dearly.
Right.
But the only way to actually know one way or another who's right, or if anyone's right, is to survey, and I'm not even sure you could do this accurately anymore, survey Cuomo voters and essentially ask them, how would they have ranked the candidates if they had ranked choice voting? How many Cuomo voters were Cuomo, Mamdani, Sliwa, and how many were never Mamdani? And my hunch is that if that election had been done on a ranked choice ballot, Mamdani would have probably done identically to Bill de Blasio, very, very, 60-some% of the two-party vote. And thus we would say you can't learn anything about how he won. Like his policies seemingly did nothing. The fact that he's charming seemingly did nothing, but it matters, right? Because if your expectation of somebody in Mamdani's situation is that in a 2-person race, they get 65 to 70% of the vote. But then there's this confounding variable that he actually ran in a 3-person field. You really do need to regress the analysis. And then if it turns out that he would have done even better than de Blasio, then you can maybe make some inferences about how his affordability agenda helped. But if it turns out that he would have done worse than de Blasio did because most Cuomo voters were like never Mamdani, and he would have done worse than de Blasio in a 2-person race, then you either have to entertain the possibility that affordability hurt him. I don't think Democrats want to do that.
Yeah.
Or the fact that he's an unrepentant democratic socialist might have hurt him. His old stances on the police. I mean, I don't like
no experience.
But you need that information before you can really do a solid analysis. And my hunch is that like he did just about as well as you could expect a Democrat in his shoes to do in a race like that. And if that's the case, then it's like, okay, like a lot of things can work. So don't sweat it too much.
I think that one of the things here that also it's worth noting that this goes for affordability, but it also goes for safety net stuff. The wrong people are voting for affordability often. Like the idea here is that people who are having the hardest time affording it, people who are struggling the most will be won over by these pitches. And I don't think there's a lot of evidence that talking about affordability or talking about economic issues or talking about the safety net wins you the votes of people facing the most precarity.
To put this in terms, black and Latino working class people vote for the moderator
class, black. Yeah, I mean, of course, this is sort of. I mean, in a lot of ways, this is the DSA, the socialist view of how you win elections. Is you appeal to these groups, and then they will all support you because you said you're going to help them, and then you win elections because there's a lot of people in these groups. It doesn't actually work like that. Very often, it's the higher middle income people voting for these issues, and very often it's the lower income groups, working class communities of color are not necessarily voting for people making these appeals. And so not to say that these appeals are bad because of that, but it indicates in some ways that people are voting based on cultural affiliations and alliances and these sort of communities of belief and stuff, and not necessarily based on responding to the policy. Will this policy proposal help me personally? And of course, this is a concern that's gone back to the dawn of like socialism. I mean, this has always been the issues that socialism was an ideology that supposedly helped the working class, but was promoted by intellectuals.
So I've had some audio trouble, so I apologize to the viewers. I will listen to work on that for the next one. So let me finish with this. So there's a lot of people running president who I would argue don't have much of a actual ideology or platform. But I'm not going to name any of them right now. So let's say you bump into one of these people who's going to run president in 2027, 2028, who's trying to win the Democratic primary, but also we're trying to win the general election. One of you guys bump into them. You're skeptical that they should say affordability 19 times an hour. I can tell. So assuming that we're in this vibes culture, there's discontent we can't measure and we don't exactly know what it's coming from. What should if your analysis of politics in America is correct, how should a Democratic presidential candidate who wants to win the election, let's assume they're flexible ideologically, because many of them are, and let's assume that they're flexible. I'll start with you, Brian.
Yeah. So I actually think that the first month of the Harris campaign is pretty close, right? Like, confrontational but joyful. I just got back from a family vacation in Santiago. That's where my mom's half of the family is from. Family down there lived through the Pinochet dictatorship, and so I have like a personal interest in how that dictatorship was ended. And it's actually kind of corny. Like Pinochet agreed to a plebiscite. Everyone was going to vote, and if he was, if the plebiscite held that he should leave office, then he would leave voluntarily, no bloodshed. And the Marxists were really unhappy because the campaign that carried the day was this kind of like milquetoasty corporate, like rainbows and corny music. But like the message of the campaign was a happy day is coming, right? Like, which says we all know what is unacceptable about the circumstances now, and what we need to do is get to tomorrow, where things will be better. And I think that like a campaign with that as its like lodestar will have an intuitive sense of how to attack Donald Trump, how to belittle him, and how to convey to people that like getting rid of him will in and of itself bring a brighter day, right? So to that end, I'd be like, if you can like ding him because he lied about affordability and then made prices go up and had no idea what he was doing and cost a bunch of people their jobs, absolutely do it. But what you really want to be mindful of is that 2 years and 3 months from now, when you become president, you're going to inherit a hobbled and corrupted government. You don't even know what you're actually going to be able to get done through that government because it's going to be so degraded. You need to let circumstances on the ground and in the country determine what your policy priorities are going to be, and you can't possibly know them right now. So don't make yourself like a vessel for people's ill-defined affordability complaints right now, such that a year from now and 2 years from now, if circumstances say you actually need to be focused on something else, you're too trapped in your myopic framework to actually address problems as they arise, or speak to them, or understand them, or come up with solutions for them, because there's going to be big ones, and affordability doesn't nearly encompass all of them. I think like if that was the mindset of one of the leading candidates for president, that would be the person that I support. I think it comes like JB Pritzker.
Brian, let me follow up and ask.
Yeah.
What do they do in 2027 with that vision, which is basically like policy, almost not just policy agnostic, but a little bit policy resistant even. So what do they do during the Democratic primary? I'm not an anti-groups person. I know some of our friends are. I think liberal groups are good, but I think they do tend to say they want to make the primary about, can you talk about your Medicaid plan or your Medicare plan? Can you talk about your wealth tax or lack thereof? I agree with you that from May, if you're the nominee from May to November, you sound like that. I'm just curious, how do you win the Democratic primary like this?
Sure. I mean, like I think it's less like we will do X on day one, and our healthcare plan is X, is Y, and we'll do. For me, what I would need to hear to believe them is that they would prioritize various political reforms so that they could actually get through a bunch of things. I know that this is probably not what either the groups want to hear, or maybe certain I think more and more primary voters want to hear we're going to fight. We're going to fight. Like we are going to get in, change the rules, kick ass. There's going to be accountability, and that is actually like a predicate to addressing the material problems that Trump has created in your lives. But like, I think that Democrats made a big mistake starting in 2008, and that I was actually a small part in like creating this problem of implying that like the presidential primary campaign process should be a process of policy iteration and refinement and specificity, such that like every candidate is expected to have 60-page white papers on every issue under the sun, and then like a convincing explanation of how they prioritize them and how they're going to get 60 votes for stuff.
Sounds good to me, but okay, I get the point. Yes.
No, I mean, it really did hem them into the situation where they feel like they need to make big and specific promises during the campaign, rather than saying things like we're going to do everything in our power to give everyone who lost their insurance to Donald Trump their health care back, and then some, right? And we don't know what that's going to entail, because we're going to have to root out all the people that he put in the government, and we're going to have to get to a 50-vote process to pass a new health care bill, and we're going to have to tax, the billionaires who put him in office to fund all this. So the details are going to be a little bit TBD, but like that's where my North Star is fixing these problems. And it starts with like really doing a deep dive into the government that we're going to inherit. And we need to be prepared for it to be radioactive, like dangerous, filled with saboteurs, dysfunctional. And it, like, if I spend the whole primary making specific promises for you, only to realize there's no capacity to do any of it, then I will have lied to you, and that's not how I'm going to run for president. I mean, this is like that's my Sorkin-esque
No, that's just well,
view of how that's how I would want to see somebody run. And if I saw somebody running that way, I would tell my readers like that is credible. That like never fall in love with your idols or whatever, but like
sure.
what that person is saying is actionable, and what this other person is saying about the public option and whether it'll be pegged to Medicare and blah blah blah, like that's not going to happen. That's all bullshit.
So I would, if I was talking to a candidate, I mean, I don't have a magic solution for winning a presidential election, but don't lose sight of the fact that this is a social contest, and that everyone in the country has an opinion about these people, and ultimately you want people to like you, and you want people to think of you as a good person that they. I mean, it's such a cliche, but they want to have a beer with, or they respect, or they think is smart, and one of the things is that so many of the things that Democrats do that are focused on policy, economics, and on just these on issues, like don't really move the needle one way or another in that kind of contest. You put out 60, putting out and it's interesting. You see, even when they put out the 60-page policy papers, like Elizabeth Warren was, I was a big Elizabeth Warren supporter. I still have her sign on my wall over here. I love Elizabeth Warren, but she put out these policy papers. I liked her not because I was reading the policy papers and like being, oh, what a good policy. I mean, I read through a couple of them, but honestly, I didn't read them all. I like that she was the person putting out the policy papers. Like I liked that. That was her character. And I like the character that made her into, and I wanted that character to be one of our leaders. And so when you are running in a national election, particularly, you are a character in a soap opera.
Okay.
And you don't, or actually, I mean, the best analogy is really just like, I think, is pro wrestling. You're a character in a pro wrestling match, and the crowd is going to have some sort of response to you, and they're going to think you as a villain or a hero, and they're going to, and separately from that, they may like or dislike you. They may enjoy watching you. They may dislike watching you. And so you need to think of ways to make people like you, and then also simultaneously you may think of ways to make them genuinely dislike and detest the other person. Now, I think you're kind of playing on easy mode when the other person is Donald Trump, frankly. I think,
or Andrew Cuomo in some ways, like Andrew
Cuomo is the ideal opponent. He is just fundamentally, he's like a vampire.
Right.
But that's what I would think about is like, don't, yeah, sure, policy is great, but never lose sight of the fact that you are engaged in something that is like a giant, greatly upscaled high school popularity contest. People are voting for their prom king, and so there's lots of ways. There are lots of ways to do that. Probably you can, Obama had his own. He has a very unique character. He's kind of intellectual. He's he speaks in these he's a great orator, but he's also got this kind of warmness about him. But he's not, he doesn't come off necessarily as kind of an everyman. He just isn't capable of doing that. And it was a very effective character. Likewise, Bill Clinton had a very effective character, but it was a very different character. Donald Trump, in some ways, has a fairly effective character, although he is also, when you dig below the surface, just a contemptible scumbag and moron. But it's like a lot of times you get these Democrats who just have no character, they have no personality, they're nothing, and it's like, don't do that. Don't think that you can substitute. Don't think that a policy proposal is a personality. And so that would be my advice. That's obviously pretty open ended, but like it's going to be different for everybody. Every single candidate is going to have a different thing that's going to work for them, and you just need to find that thing and sort of lean into it.
I do think that like an underappreciated black mark on Obama's political legacy is the extent to which he inspired so many people who wanted to be active in democratic politics to model themselves after him.
Mm-hmm.
Because now the party is filled with these like very polished, suit-wearing, law school educated, high rectitude, but without Obama's charisma or you know what I mean?
If you're not Obama, you can't be Obama. Don't try. He's going to be better than you.
and so like the reason I liked Warren was less like I appreciated. I actually didn't like her. I have a plan for that thing. I was like, it's not a good character. I liked that she would say things like, if you don't realize you're in a fight, you can't win that fight.
Yeah.
Like I knew who she was talking about, and I knew the contrast she was trying to draw is that I see the opposition clearly, and I know the levers at my disposal to fight them, and I'm going to use them, unlike them. And I believed that, and I still believe that. And in a way, I feel like, but these 70 bills that I'm going to introduce that solve all the world's problems, like I'm also going to do those things. Like, no, I don't think you are. And you were confusing the thing about you that like can appeal across the party, because there are people like in every wing of the Democratic Party who would be relieved to have somebody that they could put into office and then have some faith that they were like on to who the Republicans are and taking proactive steps not to get wrong-footed by them. And to this day, like there are very few people at the top echelon of the Democratic Party who have that skill. And like, she's not going to run for president again. And,
I think that it's also one thing to note, and I know we're short on time here, but this, I know I'm aware I'm basically describing politics as an exercise in brand management, and I think that that's not far from how politics works often. It's in part of the way so important is because things that, this can flip on its head really quickly. I mean, Joe Biden had this sort of great image, is probably why he won in 2020, of, he was Diamond Joe of The Onion. He was this aviator wearing, kind of gruff spoken, old hand. And then very quickly, because of, largely because of just TikToks being spread of him and social media videos of him staring into space. Usually it's just him like waiting to talk or something. It was like nothing was happening. Suddenly became his image in the public eye became this decrepit old man who like was barely even conscious. And it was just, it was could not be, it was irreversible. I mean, it was at that point he was doomed probably. And so it's like, you really need to be aware that the public is constantly forming an image of you, and then you need to be, managing it to some extent so that it doesn't get flipped on its head like that.
Can I say something about exactly this point, which is that like actually I like Josh Shapiro pretty well, and I note that he has maintained very high approval ratings in a swing state that resembles America, and I think that like he's got a lot to speak for him, and I also appreciate the criticisms of him, and I think 99% of me thinks he's got a good thing going, and he'd be an interesting candidate to watch. Like I personally skew toward people like Pritzker and increasingly Newsom, who are willing to fight Trump more vocally, but he's inching his way there. I think the fact that he clearly took tons of inspiration from Barack Obama, such that he now gives a speech almost exactly the way Barack Obama did, is one of these little things that's going to become a big mess for him. In that, like, if he is not hyper attuned to brand management and doesn't see it coming, that there's going to be in the same way that there was like Al Gore is beige and claims he invented the internet. Like that is coming for him because of how he speaks exactly like Barack Obama. And if he doesn't manage that well, it's going to snowball into this big dumb thing that could just actually ruin his candidacy. And yeah, it's definitely true that like candidates need to be mindful of all the ways media narratives, dumb media narratives can take shape and then overtake you. Because if you don't, then like that kind of trivial nonsense can end your political career.
Will get the last word if he wants
The
to.
Dean scream.
I was just going to say, it's funny because someone actually said that earlier, and I laughed at it. That
Yes, because I was talking too loud. Right.
Perry
Yes.
has Howard Dean mic right now, and I can't disagree.
Right.
So Perry should lead us out on a screen. No,
Yeah, do that.
honestly, my thoughts on Josh Shapiro is he should change his glasses. I mean, honestly, this is it's like one of the started talking about though. He's got these terrible glasses that kind of just make him look like a Wall Street shark.
All right, we've gone a far field now. Josh Shapiro's glasses.
That sort of impression is what matters.
I understand.
It does, so.
All right. Well, this has been a great conversation. It's been a great conversation. I'm a little depressed by, I like 60-point plans. I like policy. I mostly agree with you all. I think governing is about policy, obviously, but I think elections are not about policy, is what you all are saying. And I think it's hard to disagree with that right now. So this is great. I encourage people to catch Will on social media. He's on Twitter. He's on Blue Sky. He's one of the best posters. He keeps saying the economy is pretty good and people keep hating on him, but I respect that he is defending that point of view. Brian's got a great Substack, a lot of great essays there. He has a great recent piece about Hakeem Jeffries will almost certainly be speaker, but should he be? And I think it's a great point that Hakeem Jeffries does not strike me as a brilliant politician in the sort of category of Nancy Pelosi. So with that, great to see you guys. Thank you, and thanks everybody who joined us.
Thanks, Ray.
Bye-bye.